Ohayo gozaimasu. So, you want to learn Japanese through video games. Fantastic. That's exactly what I did for the last 6 years now, more than 6 years. So, in this video, I'll be going over everything that I've learned in these last 6 years. So, all these tips and what games to play. I'll have a nice list of games at the end. So, for the Switch, it's actually pretty easy to learn Japanese using video games through this because you don't need to buy a whole nother console. With the Switch, you just change your language and you're golden. There are some things to think about when you do change your language. If it's a physical game, sometimes they don't actually support Japanese. But if it's a digital game, you can go to the eShop and just check. It'll say Nihongo. But you can buy an English game or whatever eShop you go to. Just check the languages listed. And if it says Nihongo, then you're okay. So here's 5 tips. First, use the screenshot button. It's your best friend. If you have a cutscene in a game, you're gonna really love the screenshot button because you can take screenshots, and then once the cutscene's over, you can go back to those screenshots and look up everything. And that brings me to tip number 2. Look up stuff using English. Don't use Japanese definitions. I don't care what level you are. If you can read them or not, the fact of the matter is that using an English definition will get you to understand words much faster, and then you won't be getting this exposure to words that are basically only used in dictionaries. So you won't sound like a dictionary when you speak Japanese to your friends. Tip number 3. It's okay to not understand everything, especially when you're a beginner. It's a lot. Starting video games as a beginner is a lot. So do the things that keep you motivated. If you get stressed about trying to understand everything, it's not going to be a fun experience. And that's really the most important thing when you're doing any type of exposure to Japanese with video games is, well, it's a video game. Let's have fun with it, right? So don't try to understand everything. That kind of leads into the next one of number 4. Make flashcards when you feel like it. And don't when you don't. Flashcards are really helpful. If you have an SRS, you can use Anki, you can use the Native Shark flashcards, custom flashcards, anything. If you write the whole sentence you found it in, and then you just target that one word that you wanted to learn, and maybe do the same sentence, you have 3 words in it. That's happened to me plenty of times. So do that. But when you don't want to do it, don't, because then it gets stressful and that's not the point. And tip number 5, enjoy the game. Just enjoy the game, please. So for me personally, video games was a huge motivator to keep learning Japanese. So I always tried to enjoy it as much as I could. I looked up words when I didn't know. If I got really kind of like bored or stressed of it, I stopped. And that really helped me enjoy the game. And then I would still, even when you're not looking up words, you're getting exposure to words you already know. And you're kind of getting the feel for some words that you don't know, which is fantastic. That's exactly what you want to do with exposure. That brings us to the next thing. So what's your purpose? What's your purpose of playing these games? Probably to enjoy them. If you're watching this video about learning Japanese with video games, you probably just want to have fun, right? So have fun. Get better at playing games by playing games. For me, my Japanese learning was always just to have fun, really. So I just played games without thinking about it much, and I just enjoyed them. And I had fun. I had fun playing the game, and I had fun learning the Japanese from it. So I think that's a win-win. And that kind of leads into the next point of, if the game's too hard, stop playing. Just stop. And then come back a few months later. So continue with your core studies, maybe choose a different game that maybe it's a little easier, and then come back later to that game that you dropped. It's a really great way to see your progress. So don't be afraid to drop a game if it's too tough. There's going to be plenty of games that are too tough, no matter what level you are. Just wait and come back later. Play another game. Play a different game in the same series. If that other game is easier, that will really help with breaking down the language in the harder game. So how to tell if a game is for beginners or if it's for a higher level? A game where you need to understand the story in order to play is going to be probably more high level versus one like Pokémon不思議のダンジョン will, like, the story exists, right? But it's okay if you don't understand. You just keep playing the dungeons and then try to read what you can of the story. So things that you don't need to know the story, or maybe you already know how to play the game, those are going to be better for you if you're a beginner. And then intermediate, advanced, you have less barriers to go through. You can kind of do anything. And generally, games you've played before are always going to be easier than games you don't know how to play. Tutorial language can be kind of difficult, so if you're not intermediate or advanced, I would say maybe games where you know how to play are the best for you. And if you're a beginner and you're also curious about a game, you can always go to YouTube and find the Japanese title and then type in jikyo after it. So, for example, Domori jikyo, and that will say, so Domori, 動物の森, 動物の森 jikyo, and that will give you a live play of it. It's a let's play in English. It's a let's play. You can just kind of peek at the language there. And that's a really great way to see if a game is fit for you or if you want to maybe pause and try a different game. But yeah, with that being said, let's get into what games I recommend. So beginner games, Pokémon 不思議のダンジョン. That one is fantastic. It's got furigana. You don't have to understand the story. And it's just a fun game. Pokémon Snap. There's no story to really follow, so you don't have to worry if you're not understanding some of the language. 牧場物語再会のミネラルタウン. That one's kind of more on the more difficult side for beginners. Now we're kind of getting into more difficult beginner sides. But I think it's also really great because you don't really have to understand the story. And lots of the story and conversations are kind of like nichijou teki, which is like kind of everyday life. So it's pretty good for that. And there's furigana and most of the things, not everything. But if you've played it before, it's just fantastic. The next one, Pocket Monster, Pokemon, ne? Pokemon Let's Go Eevee or Pikachu, whatever. Let's Go. They're pretty simple as far as language goes, but the biggest thing about it is most people know how to play Pokemon. If you're watching this video, you almost guaranteed know how to play Pokemon, which is why it's such a great beginner game, because you don't have to struggle learning the game. And because of that, you can just worry about the language. And when you get bored of the language, you still know how to play Pokemon, right? These next two are like kind of beginner intermediate levels. So another one, Sumire no Sora. It's a good game. And it's just got lots of really interesting dialogue, and some of it's kind of more difficult, some of it's kind of easier. Well, the thing is, you do kind of need to understand the story as a gist of it, at least, in order to know what you're doing. So that's why it makes it a little more difficult than the previous games. And same deal, so 動物の森. That is a great game. It's got lots of nichijou teki na kaiwa. So lots of like everyday conversations, it's got furigana, it's got really everything you need. But sometimes it can be a little difficult during the tutorial stages because they use really high level keigo, really formal language. And that makes things a little more difficult. But once you get past that, I think it's pretty great. Now for intermediate, I'm just going to go right through these. So To the Moon, I played a little bit, kind of intermediate. It's pretty solid. Another intermediate, Stardew Valley. One thing, it's a translation, it's not native. So I think I've seen like one or two mistakes in like character dialogues. They're not like quite matching. Like one's female language and then one's male language. But it's pretty good, and I think it's not something to worry about. So definitely Stardew Valley is good too. Moonlighter. Moonlighter was fun, and it's got a lot of kind of more difficult to read font, which is a nice challenge. Pokemon Sword and Shield. It's a Pokemon game, again. But this one, I feel like they have more difficult language up front, which is why I put it in the intermediate. And it's kanji only, there's no furigana.嘘つき姫と盲目王子. I love this game. It's kind of expensive for how much playtime you get out of it, but it's got like rodoku, so it reads the dialogue for you, and it's just a really pleasant game. I love the characters, I love the art style, the music, it's fantastic. Screenshot button, very useful on this one. Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicle. That one's tough to say, but it's a good game. It's got older language, so it's kind of more intermediate, right? Kind of leaning towards advanced now. Zelda no densetsu, Skyward sword. That one's good. Furigana, it's relatively easy for the type of language it speaks. And yeah, it's fun. Most VNs on the Switch, 例えば Clanado とか. So Clanado, like Clanad, I've played a little bit of it. VNs are just, it's a slog to get through if you're not used to reading them in Japanese. So they're fun, but I've never been a huge fan, even in English VNs. So, but I know lots of people like them. So VNs are good too for intermediate or advanced. And then here we have the more advanced category. So Zelda no densetsu, Brewai, because I don't want to say Breath of the Wild. But Brewai, they say Brewai for the abbreviation of it. Voice of Cards is another good one that had some cool language. I played the demo. I don't think it's out yet, but it seems like it'll be really good. Rune Factory 5. So Rune Factory 5, lots of farm language. The thing about Rune Factory 5 is there's a lot of conversations and a lot of dialogue that you need to sit through, so it takes a while to go through, which is why I kind of put it up more advanced. Maybe language-wise, it's kind of intermediate, but there's so much language that it's advanced. Fire Emblem, Fuka Setsugetsu. That one, fantastic game, very difficult language if you're not used to it. Ookami, very old language, pretty good game. I like the aesthetic. I haven't played all of it yet, but it's pretty cool. But yeah, that's the list. I think one of the most important things is when you're playing these games in Japanese, it's also to continue doing your core studies. It's really important to keep up with that because you'll understand when you don't know a word, but lots of the time you won't understand when you don't know a piece of grammar. So that's why doing those core studies and getting that grammar is really helpful. So what I would recommend for that is Native Shark. So with Native Shark, you have your core studies, you have your grammar, but Native Shark also teaches a lot of things that you probably won't find in any textbooks. And the good thing about that is when you use it as core studies, once you go to your exposure, there's no big wall in the language. Like with textbooks, there's textbook language and it's too perfect and nobody actually speaks it. But with Native Shark, you can just learn it and then you see it and it makes sense. If you're curious about Native Shark, I have a link in the description, nativeshark.com/tai. That gives you extra time on your free trial if you're willing to try it. So that's my affiliate link. So if you sign up with that, then you also help support my channel. And I can make more stuff like this. So I appreciate it. Thank you. So thanks for watching. If you want to see more content like this, I'll be talking about video games. I'll also talk about life in Japan. Just kind of anything. If you're curious, leave a comment, like, subscribe. I appreciate it. Arigatou gozaimasu. And I will see you next time. じゃあねー。